Religion has always claimed to sell hope. The hope of heaven, the hope of forgiveness, the hope that a higher power is watching over you, protecting you. But when you strip away the rituals, the hymns, and the words printed on delicate paper, what lies beneath? It isn't hope. It isn't love. It's fear. The oldest, most profitable business model in human history has always been built on fear. Fear of hell, fear of punishment, fear of stepping out of line, fear of eternal consequences for temporary mistakes. Think about it. The promise of eternal paradise sounds sweet, but it only works if there's also the threat of eternal torment waiting on the other side. Heaven has no power without hell standing in the shadows. Salvation has no meaning unless damnation is close behind. For centuries, preachers have painted terrifying images that burn themselves into the mind. Fire that never goes out. Darkness that never lifts. Screams that never end. A punishment so severe that even the smallest doubts are swallowed by terror. Children have been told, if you lie, you'll burn forever. Adults have been warned, if you disobey, you'll be cast out into eternal darkness. Entire societies have been ruled by the belief that one mistake could bring down the wrath of heaven. Fear keeps people silent. Fear keeps people obedient. Fear keeps people paying, praying, and staying inside the system. Pause for a second. What do you think? Is fear the strongest tool religion has? Drop your thoughts below before we move on. Now, notice something important. Fear is always introduced first, before love, before forgiveness, before peace. The foundation is laid with fear. And once fear is planted, every other teaching grows around it. The Bible doesn't open with a gentle invitation. It opens with warnings of death, curses, floods, and fire. Religious sermons rarely begin with comfort. They begin with a warning. Without us, you are lost. And that warning spreads like wildfire, generation after generation. Parents pass it to children, not always out of cruelty, but because they too were raised to be afraid. The message repeats across centuries. Fear God. Fear His wrath. Fear what will happen if you dare to question. This isn't an accident, it's design. Fear grips the imagination in ways hope never can. Hope is fragile, hope can fade, but fear carves itself into the human mind. It creates nightmares. It controls behavior. It makes you surrender long before you even realize you had the choice to resist. And the most effective fear is not of something you can see. It's of something you can't. Something invisible. Something eternal. You can escape an angry ruler. You can fight against a tyrant. But how do you fight against eternal flames? How do you escape a punishment that follows you beyond death itself? That's why religion's greatest currency has never been love, or peace, or truth. It's fear. And once fear becomes the foundation, everything else, obedience, loyalty, belief, falls into place. Because fear doesn't just make people believe. Fear makes them surrender. Fear alone is powerful, but fear without a cure eventually collapses. People can only tremble for so long before they break. That's why religion perfected a system, one that marketers today would call the problem-solution formula. First, you create a problem. Then, you sell the only solution. In religion's case, the problem is sin, not just mistakes, not just flaws, but a stain so deep that you're told you were born carrying it. It's called original sin. Before you ever spoke your first word, before you ever made your first choice, you were already guilty. Think about what that means. From the moment you take your first breath, the system tells you, you are broken, you are unworthy, you are condemned. And then, just as the weight becomes unbearable, religion steps forward with the cure. We have salvation, we have forgiveness. We can rescue you from what you already are. It's a perfect cycle. You're trapped in a prison you didn't build, and the same institution that built the walls sells you the key. No other business in the world operates like this. Imagine a doctor who poisons you, then charges you for the antidote, or a locksmith who locks your door, then sells you the service of opening it again. Religion has been running this strategy for thousands of years. Fear creates the demand. Salvation is the product. But here's the catch. Salvation is never final. You can be forgiven, but only temporarily. You can be saved, but only if you keep believing, keep confessing, keep returning. The cycle repeats. You fall short. You feel guilty. You fear punishment. And then you're told to come back. Pay, pray, obey, and maybe, just maybe, you'll be safe. It's not designed to free you. It's designed to keep you dependent. The idea of inherited guilt makes this even more effective. Your sins aren't just yours. They belong to your family, your bloodline, your children yet unborn. Generations are chained to the same fear. It's not just you who could be punished. It's everyone you love. And what won't a human being do when their family's eternal fate is on the line? Suddenly, fear isn't just personal, it's generational. And salvation becomes a family business. Parents baptize their children not because the infants understand sin, but because they're terrified of what happens if they don't. This is how religion ensures its survival. It doesn't just sell you peace, it convinces you that without it, you and your children will face unimaginable suffering. The formula is simple, but devastatingly effective. You are condemned. Only we can save you. And millions believe it. Because when you're told the fire is eternal, even the smallest promise of escape feels priceless. If fear is the foundation, contradictions are the walls that keep believers trapped inside. Because when you read the Bible closely, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. The God it describes does not have a single, consistent character. He shifts, changes, contradicts himself, sometimes within the very same chapter. On one page, he is called a loving father, slow to anger, abounding in mercy, forgiving sins. On the next, he orders the slaughter of men, women, and infants, commanding entire nations to be wiped out in his name. Is he a God of peace or a God of war? The text says both. Exodus 15:3 declares, "The Lord is a man of war." But Romans 15:33 calls him the God of peace. These aren't small differences in interpretation. They are polar opposites. And they matter because when a believer doesn't know which God they're going to meet, fear fills the silence. Imagine living under a ruler who one day calls you beloved child, and the next condemns you to death. That uncertainty isn't love. It's terror disguised as devotion. Take morality. One of the 10 Commandments states clearly, "Thou shalt not kill." Yet the very same God commands his people to kill entire populations. Amalekites, Canaanites, Midianites. The contradiction isn't hidden. It's carved into the very structure of the text. Or consider forgiveness. In some verses, God is described as endlessly merciful, forgiving even the worst sinners. In others, he punishes not just the guilty, but their children and their children's children for sins they didn't commit. Which version is true? The merciful father or the generational tyrant? Even his emotions shift unpredictably. Numbers 23:19 says, God is not a man, that he should lie or change his mind. Yet in Exodus 32, Moses convinces him not to destroy the Israelites. He changes his mind. He relents. If God cannot change, then he did not relent. If he relented, then he is not unchanging. Both cannot be true. And yet, both are written as truth. This isn't just theological nitpicking. These contradictions fuel fear. Because how do you trust a God who might call you righteous one day and condemn you the next? How do you love a being whose very character swings between mercy and violence, peace and war, forgiveness and annihilation? The answer is simple. You don't love him. You fear him. Contradiction makes him unpredictable, and unpredictability breeds obedience. People bow not out of love, but out of terror. Because the moment you think you understand him, he shifts. And if God himself can contradict his own laws, then no human being can ever feel safe. That's the hidden genius of it all. Fear doesn't need consistency. In fact, fear thrives on contradiction. Because the less predictable the ruler, the more desperate the subjects become to please him. A consistent God might inspire respect, but a contradictory God inspires submission. And submission, more than anything else, is what keeps the system alive. If contradictions in God's character keep believers uneasy in life, the fear of the afterlife ensures they never escape, even in death. Here's something most people don't realize. In the earliest layers of the Bible, there is almost no mention of hell. The Old Testament speaks of Sheol, a vague, shadowy place where the dead simply rest. No flames, no demons, no eternal torture. But as time passed, the story changed. The afterlife was rewritten, not as a quiet end, but as a cosmic courtroom where eternity itself was at stake. Suddenly, you weren't just living for today, you were living for forever. Every action, every thought, every mistake wasn't just temporary. It was eternal evidence, judged by an eternal God. And most importantly, there was a new threat: hell. A place where fire never dies. A place where torment never ends. A place that makes even the harshest punishment on earth look merciful by comparison. This wasn't just theology. It was strategy. Because nothing holds the human mind tighter than the fear of endless suffering. Think about it. Death is already terrifying enough. The unknown, the silence, the end of consciousness. But add to that the idea that death isn't the end at all, that it's just the beginning of unending pain, and you have the ultimate control mechanism. Other religions throughout history offered some version of this too, but Christianity perfected it. By tying morality to eternal outcomes, it created the most powerful psychological trap imaginable. Disobey? Eternal flames. Obey? Eternal bliss. It's the highest stakes game you could ever play, and the rules were written so that fear always outweighs hope. Because paradise, as beautiful as it sounds, is abstract, hard to imagine, hard to picture. But torment? That's easy. Every person alive knows what pain feels like. Now magnify that pain, multiply it, stretch it across eternity. That image burns itself into the mind far deeper than any promise of paradise. That's why hell became the centerpiece of sermons for centuries. From medieval priests warning peasants in candlelit churches, to revival preachers in colonial America thundering about fire and brimstone, to modern televangelists on glowing screens threatening eternal separation from God. Fear of hell has always been the sharpest weapon, and it's important to note the timing. The doctrine of hell grew louder as institutions grew stronger. The message shifted from quiet Sheol to raging inferno, not because of divine revelation, but because leaders discovered how effective it was. Fear doesn't just win hearts, it keeps them. Ask yourself, if heaven alone were enough, why would hell ever be needed? Why does love always come with the shadow of eternal punishment? The truth is simple. Fear of the afterlife is religion's masterstroke. It ensures obedience not just in life, but in death. You don't just fear what God will do to you tomorrow. You fear what He might do to you forever. And when fear stretches across eternity, there is no escape. Fear doesn't just live in private prayers or whispered confessions. It has always been a public weapon. Religious institutions learned early that fear could control not just individuals, but entire societies. In medieval Europe, the church was not just a spiritual guide. It was the supreme authority. Kings bowed to it. Peasants feared it. And the weapon that made this power possible was not armies or swords. It was excommunication. To be excommunicated meant you were cut off from salvation itself. It wasn't just losing access to a building. It was losing access to heaven. Overnight, your eternal fate turned from paradise to flames. Your family could abandon you. Your community could shun you. Your very name could be erased. All because one institution decided you had stepped too far out of line. That is the power of fear as social control. You don't need chains when you convince people that disobedience will damn their souls. Centuries later, the strategy looked different, but the pattern was the same. During the Great Awakening in colonial America, preachers like Jonathan Edwards painted images so terrifying they shook entire towns. In his infamous sermon, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, he told congregations they were dangling over the pit of hell like a spider over a flame, held up only by God's fragile mercy. People wept, people screamed, some fainted in fear, and church attendance soared. Fear was good for business then, just as it had been in the Middle Ages, and it didn't stop there. Even in modern times, the message hasn't changed, only the delivery. Televangelists warn that rejecting their gospel won't just lead to hardship now, but eternal suffering later. Parents raise children with nightly reminders of hellfire waiting for those who disobey. Politicians invoke God's wrath to rally voters, insisting that laws must follow His will, or society itself will collapse. The pattern repeats. Fear of eternal punishment reinforces obedience to human authority. Think about it. Why does a preacher need you to fear the afterlife? Because once you accept that your eternal soul is on the line, you'll follow almost any instruction. Give money, vote a certain way, submit to rules that may not even make sense. Fear makes questioning dangerous. Fear makes silence seem safer than doubt. And that's how fear sustains power, not just over hearts, but over laws, governments, and entire cultures. The genius of this system is that it doesn't require constant force. It doesn't need soldiers in every street. It only needs people to believe the consequences of disobedience stretch beyond death itself. With that belief in place, obedience becomes voluntary, because no one dares to risk eternal pain. From cathedrals to revival tents to glowing television studios, the method has been the same for centuries. Scare them into obedience. Remind them what happens if they leave. Convince them safety lies only inside the system. And history shows it works again and again. Because fear doesn't just bend individuals, fear bends nations.